everyone. Thank you all for coming, and sorry to break up your conversations. Hopefully you can continue them afterwards. If you don't know me yet, I think I know everyone here. My name is Cody. I am the director of the Mining and Ronald Jameson Museum. I'm approaching 1 year here now, so that is great. Thank you all. And we are finishing our Winter Lyceum speaker series here today. This is our fourth and final speaker, so thank you for showing up for that. I am very excited to introduce our speaker. Tracy and I, we actually go back quite a ways. So Tracy is a emeritus professor from the University of Wisconsin-Platteville. She did teach history there. I don't know if any other studies history. And I was lucky enough to take some of her classes when I was going to school here. So she was there, and while she was there, she was studying all sorts of different things, but this subject she has been really researching for 15 years. She's been kind of looking at the broader picture of history in southwest Wisconsin in the mining district for over 30 years now at this point. So without any further ado, I would like to introduce Tracy and let her speak about her research, and may we learn more about the early housing in the lead mining district. So thank you.
Thank you, Cody. Well, it's a friendly audience. Thank you. I don't need a microphone because there aren't many people here, huh? Everybody's good? You can hear me? They're lost. Well, I think it's being recorded, so if people want to hear it again later, or people, if your friends missed it and wish they'd heard it, it sounds like you're going to get a chance to do that. So I think it'll be on Facebook or somewhere where we say this is where you go to get this lecture. So, yeah, I got really interested in this topic because my friend Roger Reddington of Council Hill, Illinois, when I was a teenager, I came out here and I met him. My uncle introduced me to him, and he said, Roger said, I'm going to show you where your family had their first house in the lead mine district in 1834, which is because I knew that date. It was 1834 when they came from England and came to this area to be miners and smelters. And I said, okay. And sure enough, he showed me this little hut and a house built on top of it that was falling down a little bit. Now it's really bad. And I was enchanted. I was like, really? And I was so curious. So, over time, going to school and studying history, I decided, okay, this is gonna be one of the projects I'm gonna work on, is this housing issue. Where do people live in the lead mine district? So I have to say, one of my favorite kinds of adventures, is exploring the rich landscapes of the driftless region, an area that was spared from the last of the great ice ages some 12,000 years ago. This region, which includes southwest Wisconsin, a little bit of northwest Illinois around Galena, a bit of Iowa near Dubuque, and up to southeast with Minnesota, it's generally rolling, sometimes very hilly, and rich with springs of seeping water. Within the driftless is the old lead mine district, the land my mothers and forefathers came to. So the land they chose when they left northern England. They came here because they wanted to mine and farm, and because this became the most significant lead mining region in the world by 1830. It's a short-lived little moment, but it was enough to grab the interest of lead miners from Missouri all the way through Europe. If you're interested in lead mining, you're going to come here and try your hand. In sleuthing the local countryside for remnants of my own ancestors, the farms they owned, the lead mines they worked, the small country graveyards where their bones lie, I came to have a deep fascination with all the evidence still left on the land of the lead mining era. And as my husband Jeff, right here, tour, and I wandered along old wagon traces and deep into the woodlots of old farmsteads, we occasionally find outbuildings that defy easy interpretation. Was this a root cellar? Was this an ice house? A cooling cellar? Was this the remnant of an industrial site? Or could this have been a little home built and used by early lead miners? So my talk today is going to outline the research we've done and the documentation efforts we've made concerning the little arched limestone buildings that hide in the brushy hollows of the old mining district. Many years ago, as I said, Roger Reddington introduced me to this topic. I was a teenager, but it stuck with me until about 15 years ago. I started doing, really looking for these little buildings. Finding these small limestone huts is a rare pleasure, and to date we've been able to find and document about a dozen of them. By examining the building techniques and materials, we can make some preliminary judgments about their function and age, and by investigating the documentary evidence, we can know about the variety of housing used by early lead miners. We can compare these small stone buildings with other housing structures built in a similar time period in the lead mine region to assess whether they could have been used as homes. From our research, we believe that these huts were living quarters for miners and perhaps their families. We further speculate that the people who built these structures were from northern England, where lead mining was a primary occupation and vaulted limestone building construction was well known. I want to survey the main points that have led us to this conclusion. But first, let me briefly summarize the situation concerning lead mining in northwestern Illinois, southwest Wisconsin, and northeast Iowa, emphasizing the 1788 to 1846 time period of frontier settlement. While Chicago was in 1830 was little more than a fur trading fort occupied by only a couple hundred villagers, the lead mine district population was estimated to have been about 10,000. The town of Galena itself had about 800 white inhabitants. Galena, Illinois had become the southern entrepot for the burgeoning lead mine district, a federal district of the upper Mississippi Valley. It was a distinct, federally controlled area giving special consideration in 1807 by Thomas Jefferson, who was president. By 1830, this large population, which had developed in less than 10 years' time, faced frontier conditions and skirmishes with the native population. Much like the 49ers in the gold rush, these early miners tended to be migratory and restless. This largely male endeavor had but one focus, and that is to strike a lead, meaning to discover a large vein of ore and hopefully reap enough profit to go back home with money to spare. Players in this lead rush experience include several distinct groups. First, we see the intra-migration of Native Americans to the upper Mississippi. Then white trappers and traders, mostly from the Canadian North, who engaged Native American peoples to mine and smelt lead in exchange for trade goods. By 1821, we find Southerners engaged in early mining, and soon after, Eastern Yankees were coming into this area. By the late 1820s, some foreign-born Irish arrived in the area, followed by the British, and then the Germans by 1840s and 50s. Prior to contact with French Canadians, several Native American nations in the region did dig for lead ore. I want to though first point out this Chandler map because most of you who have done any research of this in this area know this map. Do we have a copy on display here? Yes. We do, good, yeah. So this map was drawn from the notes of actually another surveyor. But Chandler, who is in Galena, he's the one who did this map. And it shows, if you look closely, you can find every mill, farm, Indian village, mine, house. It's pretty amazing. And all along the edges, well, they're talking up the lead mine district. So whether the facts are exactly correct, we do not know. He claims there's 10,000 people in this region by 1829. Seems like a lot. White people. Hard to say. But it's a super interesting map. So you can get a copy. Can we sell them here anymore? Yes. Okay. We've always sold them here. I was the collections manager here a few years back, and I was on the board of directors, and I worked with a bunch of these people, so we all had a good time. And anyway, I'm glad Cody's here to keep us going. So anyway, so we have a number of kinds of people coming into the area, and we see that prior to contact with the French Canadians, several Native American nations in the region were already digging for lead ore. Generally, the lead nuggets were pounded into shapes to be worn on clothing or as jewelry. When you take lead, pound it and kind of polish it up a little bit, it's kind of shiny, as you know. It can look kind of gray and dull at first, but as you work it, it can be very shiny. So this is basically unsmelted lead ore. In other words, it has the sulfur molecules haven't been driven off. This is the Native Americans at this period, the early period, were turning it into little amulets. Okay, so it was later, upon meeting with the French, getting weaponry, guns, you need bullets, you need lead shot, and so now you're going to be really interested in lead ore because you need it, to hunt and to kill your enemy, apparently. So after the early contact with the French, the Muskogee, Sauk, Menominee, and Ho-Chunk people used these crude makeshift furnaces to smelt the lead ore. They sold this ore to French Canadians and other European descendants for the production of pewter, lead musket balls, and increasingly for paint, which was popular by 1800 with the Americans of the East Coast. According to Phil Millhouse, a Wisconsin archaeologist, the Sauk and Muskogee had spiritual taboos about going under the earth, so their lead mining was done in open pit trenches instead of in vertical underground shafts. And they also smelted lead ore in inclined smelters or furnaces that were set up along hillsides so that they wouldn't, nothing's going to be underground for these folks. A huge quantity of timber was required to make a fire hot enough in this type of furnace to smelt out the lead ore. While the melting point of metallic lead is only 330 degrees, to literally smelt lead ore is to drive off the sulfur compounds, and that requires a temperature of about 1200 degrees. In the memoirs of the great Sauk warrior Makataime Shikiakiak, or Black Sparrow Hawk, he remembered lead mining as an occupation for the women of the tribe, as well as for the older men. It was part of the seasonal rotation of work done, as he explained, when the corn was knee-high. The women, children, and older men would go north to the lead mines, leaving their village of Sauganac on present-day Rock Island, Illinois, while the young men would go in the direction towards sundown to hunt deer and buffalo. And after 40 days, they would all return back to the village. French trappers, voyageurs, and coureurs de bois had been plying the Mississippi, Fox, and Wisconsin waterways since the 1600s, and many were interested in encouraging the production of refined lead, an international commodity. One French-Canadian entrepreneur was the celebrated Julien Dubuque, establishing a farm, storehouse, and mines on the west shore of the Mississippi at the city that bears his name. Dubuque received legal permission from the Spanish commandant in 1796. In recognition of the sovereign power, he named his settlement the Mines of Spain. But the more important permission came from the local Muskogee leaders almost a decade earlier when they allowed Dubuque to use the land during his lifetime. In order to seal the deal, Dubuque may have married a Métis woman, that is, a woman whose father was French and whose mother, in this case, was Muskogee, or we used to call them Fox Indians. Marriage into the dominating nation would allow him the use of Indian-held territory. He may have also married the daughter of a local chief named Potosa, but that is a largely unsubstantiated legend. Everyone in Dubuque will tell you that, but we don't actually have any evidence for it. This arrangement may have been of great benefit to the Muskogee landholders, as the new equipment, funding, and the buyers known to Dubuque would have aided them in increasing their lead production and sales. Over time, Dubuque had a sturdy house, probably made of logs, a granary, storehouses, and other outbuildings. He was first to create large-scale mining and smelting operations on both sides of the Mississippi River. He hired French, Métis, and Native men and women to mine, smelt, farm and procure furs for his business interests in Canada and St. Louis and Upper Louisiana. After his death in 1810, the Muskogees at Kettle's Village carried on. This map is in the archives at Missouri at the Historical Society there. And this is when Dubuque owed a bunch of money to Choteau, and that family is considered the family that started St. Louis. Although, again, that's a little bit disputed. And Choteau said, okay, well, you owe me a whole lot of stuff. So it says Monsieur Auguste Choteau on the bottom there. I don't know if you can see that, but he's saying, oh yeah, I own this because you owed me the money. So I must own this land. So this was a huge dispute between the Muskogee and the French Americans. Well, they became Americans all through the period. Yeah, sure.
So you're saying that the Indians told the white man that he was owed them money, or the vice versa?
No, Choteau, who was a Frenchman, a French Canadian living in St. Louis, he's the one who said, Dubuque, you owe me a bunch of money, so I'm going to take this land. And Muskogee said, we never gave him the land. We said he could have a lease until he died. So that went to court until 1851. Was finally decided, and the Choteau family and their heirs never got the land. Of course, by then, the Americans had already pushed the Muskogee way off, got first to Iowa and then on to Kansas. So. Anyway, the main point is that by 1850, we find that on the east side of the upper Mississippi, Indians tended about 20 lead furnaces along the Fever River at present-day Galena, Illinois. A stock Muskogee summer village of a couple hundred individuals was sited near those mines and smelting operations. French-Canadian traders, along with a very few Americans, were kept to their outlying forts or to islands in the Mississippi where the local tribesmen would visit to trade their lead for pots, cloth, weapons, and tools. And this resistance of white interference in their economy went on from 1810, when Dubuque died, until they were forced to share the lead district with incoming whites who brought the army with them, right? So it was harder for them to resist when there was, army regulars present. As lead mining activities increased, it brought the frontier region to the attention of the young government in Washington. A section by the Mississippi River of 5 leagues square, and that is 38,000 acres of land, were set aside for the federal lead mines, and the rest was designated tribal land. In 1821, the lead district, that 5 leagues square, was turned over to the Ordnance Bureau of the War Department. While the district had been reserved for U.S. government use since 1807, a system of leasing the land to be mined and then taxing the resultant ore had not been worked out. Thus, no official mining leases in the mineral district were recorded until 1822. The U.S. military enabled white miners to encroach on native lands, although as Indian agents were assigned to the area, there were some examples where they tried to advocate for indigenous land use rights. The living conditions of incoming miners could be very poor, especially in the 1820s. Moses Meeker, an early lead miner in the region and prominent citizen of Mineral Point, related that the men at the mining camps had only spoiled food. In the 1820s, they were living on, quote, sour flour, say that 10 times, and condemned army pork, which produced a number of cases of scurvy, and some of them quite severe. 2 of them have lost the use of their legs. Other sources tell of outbreaks of dysentery, resulting in many deaths. With this influx of non-Native American miners came a variety of shelter types, and this brings me to the story of the badger huts, a name I have morphed from the term badger hole, which I'm going to explain in a moment. So the buildings we define as badger huts have all the following in common. They are built of hand-cut limestones. They're made of these limestone blocks. They're mortared, and the stones are not dressed. They are of a vaulted construction with either a keystone or a lintel stone as the roof support. They are found very near old lead mines. They're very near a creek or river. They're covered in sod. They have no windows. They have a vent hole in the back of the roof. They're about 10 or 12 feet long and 8 or 9 feet wide and about 8 feet high. They are standalones. There's no evidence of another structure nearby that is of the same age, and they're very well built, and some of them are in remarkably good condition today. I want to review the kinds of housing that existed in the lead mine district and explain why our badger huts should be listed among them instead of being dismissed as root cellars, which they are often referred to today by the farmers who have them on their land. We know that Indians of southwest Wisconsin and much of the upper Midwest lived in dome-shaped houses called wigwams, or wickiups, they're sometimes called. These were built of sapling poles and covered over with woven mats or birch bark. Daniel Smith Harris, who arrived in Galena in 1823 as a youth with the Moses Meeker group, recalls the wigwams dotting the hillsides and ravines of Galena, Illinois. These shelters could be kept relatively dry, and they were warmed in winter by a small open fire. The early miners from the southern region of Missouri and Tennessee talked about abodes known locally as badger holes. These were subterranean dwellings. According to Mark Nipping, past director of Pendarvis and other Wisconsin historic sites, the term badger hole was a good-natured exaggeration for the primitive living conditions endured through those early years and is akin to the comical names the miners applied to their early camps, such as Shake Rag, Peddler's Creek, Dirty Hollow, etc. These badger holes were made from sucker holes or shallow diggings where lead was explored for and perhaps not found. Going into an already dug hole, miners would open it up to a 10 by 12 foot area, prop up the walls of the shallow hole with sapling poles, and for a roof, cover it over with down timbers and then maybe some earth and sod. Those are talked about in the literature. Well, the term badger hole and badger hut have caused some confusion and sometimes mild hostility by those who care about these things, and there's only a very few of us who do care. In Potosi, Wisconsin, there is an old lead mine hill with some shallow pits circled by rough limestone blocks, and that's a picture of it right there. In 1986, the National Register of Historic Places was called in to study these two pits. Legend, and it's way up on a mine hill. Have you been up there? Okay, I've walked it several times. Yeah, it's interesting. Yep, you go past the church and you keep going and you go into the woods and
Cemetery up there?
yep, the cemetery's up there, and then you go past that and into the woods. Yep. So these two holes were there, and the National Register came out, and the local historians wanted to verify that these remnants were authentic and historically important homes for miners. But in the end, the report listed the location as the Potosi Badger Hut's site. But upon studying the report and the actual site, I think that at best these could be remains of badger holes, the kind I just discussed, the little shallow pits. Why anyone would choose so, however, to sleep up on a steep hill with no source of water sort of defies logic. Also, the pubs were down below in the village, not on the mine hill, and that didn't matter. Still is. Question comes to mind, why would anyone accept such poor housing conditions? The Indians had much drier and warmer accommodations, so why would early miners live in badger holes? Well, one answer is that the federal government sought to retain control of the valuable lead region by imposing many restrictions on the incoming miners. Land that might be lead-bearing could not be bought or sold. All timber was supposed to be reserved for the use of lead ore smelters, and crops could not be grown in any quantity in the district. Approval had to be given for making fields larger than a quarter acre. Outlawing the cutting of trees except to be used for mining and smelting purposes impeded efforts to establish permanent communities. The rule was that if one wanted to build a log cabin in the lead mine district, the trees had to be procured from one of the many islands of the Mississippi River. Each log could weigh up to 700 pounds and had to be transported over rude trails. Furthermore, since land could not be purchased where lead was in evidence, but only leased, improving a lead claim with a permanent home was impractical because one couldn't resell it anyway. Thus, we find rude shelters in the district in the early boom period of the lead mine district. The Southerners, mostly from Missouri, Southern Illinois and Kentucky, and Tennessee, used the Mississippi waterway to reach the lead mine district. They were known as suckers because, like the sucker fish, they went upstream in late spring to the lead mines and returned south in the fall. They mined the easy ore on the surface or hauled ore for others. They only needed very temporary shelter, and a badger hole was good enough for them. This is borne out in the memoir of Daniel M. Parkinson of Carter County, Tennessee. He recalled that upon removing to New Diggins, Wisconsin in 1827, quote, the inhabitants usually lived in dens or caves, a large hole or excavation being made in the side of a hill or bluff, the top being covered over with poles, grass, and sod. In extolling the virtues of the Southern character, he said when, quote, the noblest traits of our race were practiced by those of the South and the West. The early settlers had no locks on their doors, and all were invited to visit their humble dugout shelters. So Daniel Parkinson tells us about these, so we know they existed. All right, let's go to the next slide. According to George Fiedler, historian of Mineral Point, after the horrors of the Black Hawk War in 1832, Fort Jackson, a wood stockade built at Commerce and Fountain Streets, was torn down and, quote, sod huts and log cabins were reconstructed near the Jerusalem Spring in the lower part of town. Mineral Point was rebuilt as a town of huts and shanties. According to John H. Roundtree, one of the first settlers in Platteville, he spent his first winter in a sod hut. Was he referring to what I call a badger hut? Moses M. Strong, lawyer and surveyor from Vermont, arrived in Mineral Point in 1836. Strong found many of the prospectors and miners living like badgers in dugouts in the side of the hills or in crude stone and clay huts. A writer to the Galena Advertiser in 1829 wrote, our little cabins, half concealed in the slope of the hill and rudely covered over with sods, these pygmy huts we now inhabit. So there's lots of documentary evidence about how people lived. And now the question is, can you find it on the landscape? Well, yes, you can. That's the cool part. So he said, Moses Strong, crude stone and clay huts. I think that's a crude stone and clay hut right there. So it's from these descriptions of the early lead miners' houses that Wisconsin became known, of course, as the Badger State. Many log cabins were built in the lead mine district despite the federal laws and the great difficulty in obtaining logs. Some people simply disobeyed the law and cut down trees for building cabins. Next one. Oak savanna was a native ecosystem of the lead district with only about 10% of the district in timber. These trees tend to be rangy in their growth habits. See how rangy those are? That's not going to make a good log cabin, is it? Because they're not straight. So logs for cabins need to be straight and tall. So trees had to be from a more densely forested biome, only found near the rivers in the lead mine district. As stated before, this was a difficult prospect. Another problem, aside from the legal one, was that by 1835, in areas of heavy mining, most of the trees were already felled and burned up in the smelters, and the ones that stood nearby were stunted. And this is a little hard to read, but basically this is Charles Smith, who was the agent for the federal government, trying to make people sign up for leases and make them pay money and make them, trying to control the system for the federal government. He was an agent of the federal government. He's saying that this individual, David, looks like Boyles or Broyles, is permitted in lot number 21 of the upper street in the town, which is Galena. He's going to get this much footage on the front of the street, and he's going to go back to the bluff. But if he wants to have a house, he has to procure his timber from the island of the Mississippi, the islands of the Mississippi, and he must comply with all regulations. So this is, being told to these miners who are coming in, don't try it. Don't take the wood that we need for the smelters and for, building up our mining district. Because they own the land, so they could tell people what could happen there. The federal government owned the land. Okay, so the best kind of housing to have in the 1830s around here was a frame one. However, milled lumber was very expensive and difficult to obtain. We know that when Colonel Henry Dodge, the first territorial governor of Wisconsin, chose the area near Belmont, Wisconsin to build the 1836 territorial capitol buildings, he chose to erect frame structures from lumber milled in Pittsburgh, floated down the Ohio River, up the Mississippi River, into the Fever Galena River, unloaded at Galena, and hauled the 30 miles to the new village. Yeah. Another kind of housing material that became prevalent in the district was dressed stone. Mineral Point gets the prize for the largest number of these structures in the region, with the first one built there in 1834. These buildings were usually put up by Cornish miners who made their way into the district and settled in ethnic enclaves in Mineral Point and Dodgeville. These are beautifully built buildings, but not exactly frontier miners' huts. They are fairly large and often have second stories. Galena also boasts a number of these structures in the Old Town Row at the north end of the city there. In summary, the many types of housing we find in the early lead district include wigwams, dugouts or badger holes, log cabins, frame houses, and dressed stone buildings. And now I want to turn to the issue of whether or not the stone structures I've been documenting were built to be homes or for some other purpose. I have to admit they can look similar. For example, you might know this building. This photo taken in Potosi, Wisconsin, that was a very early and lively mining community. This structure is built into a hillock, has a sod roof, and is about the same size as the buildings that I call badger huts. But this building is clearly much later. It's made of Portland cement construction, a material not widely used until the late 19th century, much later than the boom years of the lead rush. Next slide. And there's a spring house right in front of the structure, so its use was probably a dairy cooler. I'm sure we can find that on a map of Mineral Point, Potosi, if we look for it. But here's another example. We dismissed this one as being a root cellar. We figured it's not a badger hut. No one lived in it. It's a root cellar because it appears to be made of poured cement. And then one more. There we go. And but however, when we went inside of it, because it's really fun to go inside these weird little buildings that are dotting the countryside. Next slide. We saw a crack in the building inside it, and the Portland cement, the old cement was cracked. Well, there was a part of it that was cracked, and we saw that. We realized, oh, okay, so they put 6 inches of poured concrete over a badger hut. So they're retrofitting, right? They're reusing, they're remaking, because they want coolers and they want root cellars by the time we're in the 1850s, 60s, 70s. So we're retrofitting old badger huts. Another slide. So root cellars are structures built to keep food cool and not frozen, and to keep animals out of provisions. As the name implies, root vegetables such as potatoes, rutabagas, carrots and turnips, and fruit such as apples were stored in root cellars. We know that freedom to farm on any commercial scale on lead-bearing land was forbidden in the area until 1846. The 1825 law specified that lead claims would be 300 square yards per claim, and an additional quarter acre per miner could be farmed. The idea was that land in the lead district needed to be reserved for the miners and the smelters so they could produce lead and fill the U.S. arsenal with lead shot. We also know from the lead mine registry kept by Charles Smith, that early sub-agent who I quoted earlier, that individuals were granted the use of up to 50 or more acres occasionally, but these were just leases and only given on a case-by-case basis. Miners complained about this ban on farming from the earliest period. Over time, the rules loosened so that in 1834, if a leaseholder could prove that the acreage he wanted to farm wasn't lead-bearing, he could purchase the acreage from the land office and farm it. Due to the corruption at the land office in Mineral Point, and to an extent the Galena office, land that was actually lead-bearing was often sold into private hands throughout this period. In any case, farm production increased each year, so that by 1850 the lead district was becoming settled with family farmers who replaced the restless frontier lead mining population. The lack of sufficient local food production from 1820 to 1850 caused high prices and sometimes a scarcity of food in the lead district. According to Sir Charles Murray, who visited the region in 1835, only 1/20th of the food supply required in the lead district was produced locally. The leasing laws made it risky to plant orchards or build gardens since the improvements were not on privately owned land. In the winter, if the ice formed earlier didn't break up on the Mississippi when expected, mild famine conditions prevailed in the lead district, as happened in the winter of 1838-39. To bother building sturdy stone vaulted edifices as root cellars when there was so little excess food in the district just doesn't make sense to me. Another hint that the early lead mine district didn't require well-built large root cellars concerns the food people ate. From the evidence we have, the frontier dinner tables in the region were not loaded with fresh produce. Again, not needing root cellars yet at this point. When Englishman G.W. Fanshawe visited the district in May of 1837, he commented the food was always the same. He'd get coffee, rice, treacle, bread, maybe butter, if he was lucky. He commented that no food was grown locally, but was all shipped in. He said that even fresh meat was hard to find. Daniel Parkinson reflected on the tough years of 1830 and 31 when the lead market fell and depression hit the area. At that time, he owned a tavern in Mineral Point and was outraged at the high prices of the provisions he needed to buy for his tavern. He said, flour commanded from $15 to $18 per barrel, pork $30 per barrel, coffee 50 cents, and sugar 25 cents a pound. From his provision list, we can assume he was serving his tavern guests flour biscuits, probably fried in lard, salt pork, and coffee with sugar. So as I've tried to demonstrate here, due to negligible fresh food surpluses, large root cellars weren't needed in the lead district prior to the era of large-scale farming and later dairying, which leads me to believe our little stone huts were lived in, not used for food, used for people. Other factors lead us to strongly suspect that the badger huts were originally built for people and not for root vegetables. Location and context are important considerations. Let's review a couple of the criteria that we had established. Badger huts had the following in common. They're very near old lead mine operations. They are very near a creek or a river. They are standalones. There's no evidence of another structure nearby that is the same age. A root cellar implies a home is on the property. At the sites where we find badger huts, we don't find evidence of buildings that are from the same early period that we believe the huts were built. At the Leakley site, just north of Galena in Council Hill area, they built the badger hut first and then ingeniously built a house on top of it. Well, it turns out this is my family's badger hut. So this is the one I first was introduced to as a teenager. The other buildings that were at the site include an 1860s era farmhouse now gone and an 1880s barn still standing. The badger hut was the first home of the Leakley family. That's the inside of it. This is where they lived when they first arrived sometime between 1829 and 34. A lead furnace or smelter is noted on an early surveyor's map of the area, dated 1842, and mine pits and diggings are also noted. Next slide. And that's what it looked like in 1960s when my uncle took that photo of our family's first home. But the badger hut is on the right underneath there. So they built it right on top. Okay. The Dade Birkbeck badger hut, just up the Galena River from the Leakleys, was built just in front of a hill that still bears evidence of old mine tailings. It may have been built by the same team as it has the same dimensions as the Leakley hut. The only building that may have been near there was across the street and down the road about 100 feet and was probably a framed dormitory type building to house miners in the later period, even possibly the zinc period, when the lead mines were gone through again to extract the zinc, which was a whole nother process. So if that frame building did require a root cellar for kitchen preparations, wouldn't it be sited right next to the building, not 100 or more feet away? Another example is a badger hut in Galena. There's evidence of early mining shafts and pits, and then there's a later 1870s frame house on this property. On this very narrow ledge of land up above the street level, there doesn't appear to be an earlier structure to serve as the house for the supposed root cellar. So the last question I want to address in considering these structures as homes is who would bother building a stone vaulted house? I've already discussed the difficulties, both legal and practical, of putting up log or frame houses. The people who are planning a permanent move, they don't want to live in a hole in the ground. But the early British miners who came to the lead district in the first half of the 19th century may very well be our badger hut builders. North British miners understood vaulted buildings of limestone and were advanced in their mining technology. The British-style smelters used to refine lead ore were of an arch vaulted limestone construction using a keystone arch and another one, and vaulted limestone construction using a keystone arch arrangement in most cases. As British miners came into the lead district, they brought with them the technology and architectural know-how of their native country. It is believed that it was primarily the British from the North Pennines lead district who built the stone huts. And part of that I say is because the places where I find the most huts, it's called things like British Hollow, British Settlement. The names, you look up the names like Leakley, Birkbeck, they're all from the North Pennines, and these are where the huts are. So I'm putting documentary evidence together with the evidence on the ground, or trying to. So the North British migration was a chain migration like most migrations, where large interrelated families settled together in ethnic enclaves. The enclave at Council Hill, just north of Galena, is such a settlement. We have the Birkbecks, Leakleys, Little Rains, and Sedgwicks, all from the same mining dales in England, and were already related by blood and marriage. They arrived in groups which encouraged other related groups to remove to Council Hill. They were all Methodist or primitive Methodist in their faith and worked to build the churches and schoolhouse of their district. They were engaged in mining, and soon some became the better paid owners of the smelting operations. Knowing how to build a smelter means knowing how to build with limestone and execute perfect vaulted structures. The native stone in North England is also limestone, and as I said, their mining traditions went back many generations. Another British enclave in the lead mine district is just east of Potosi. The bustling village that emerged around a lead smelter and mines was called British Hollow. I call this the Badger Hut capital of the world. Its inhabitants were generally North English and were enticed to the region for the mining. The earliest period of British Hollow's history mirrors that of the whole district. Frontier conditions had to be coped with, and ethnic cohesion gave meaning to the travails. We have found no fewer than 6 huts in relative close proximity in British Hollow. The smelter built there in the late 1830s is likely the last of its kind in the United States that has any structural remains. Unfortunately, in 2023, a group of well-meaning but stubborn local enthusiasts decided to try to rebuild the smelter using cinder blocks and an inaccurate design. That's what it looked like before the work was done, and then there's afterwards. I don't know how well you can see that, but it's a lot of cinder block and modern stone, and you can't actually smelt with those 2 arches. That's not how it works. So it's just a little sad they didn't ask somebody about it first. But nothing we can do about it now. But you can still go visit this. It's on Hippie Hollow Road. Yeah. So this has cinder blocks and an inaccurate design, but prior to that, we were able to examine the mortar used between the limestone blocks and saw that the mortar contained bits of old slag, the remaining debris left over after the lead is smelted out, that you get slag. Well, this same mortar is used in our badger hut construction in many of the badger huts we found. Platteville was also an early hub of lead mining and ore smelting activity. The Bevins mine, which is behind this building right here, was the site of a major vein of lead ore beginning in 1845. But miners had been digging and living in the place we call Platteville since, we're not sure, but way before, probably before 1820. One day I got an email from a woman who wanted to know if I could tell her if the strange dips in her land were old pits, old mine pits. Also, she remembered playing in an old stone hut buried in the hillock in the back 40, and she wanted me to look at that too. And I'm like, hot dog, maybe that's Badger Hut, right? No. So Jeff and I went out to the property. We suited up against the emerging stinging nettle and the spring ticks to walk through the old pasture land and come across the pits. Indeed, that land had a lot of mining activity. We counted 5 large pits and 23 small mining pits from the old days. Consulting the archives on the campus of UW Platteville and other sources, I learned that the property was being mined quite early. On the Lucius Lyon survey map made in the spring of 1833, he indicated extensive diggings on the property and old digs nearby. In the back, a badger hut was erected very near the spring. There is no evidence on plat maps or on the ground that any other structure was built near the hut. It seems most likely that this was an early home. What a find. It has all the elements I would look for to determine if this little building could be a genuine badger hut. Other considerations to ponder when determining if these huts were for habitation have to do with functionality. Some of my fellow researchers have suggested they're just too small to be houses, so they must be outbuildings. Well, taking a measuring tape with us, we looked into the measurements of other early buildings that were built to be homes. We found log cabins that were of the same dimension. And the remains of a stone building we found in Captees Hollow at the Mines of Spain Park in Dubuque also had the same dimensions as a badger hut. We found that the Leakleys built their cabin, right on top of the house, or built the house right on top of the badger hut, so the footprint is the same as the hut. We find references to many log cabins being only 10 by 12 in size. The only downside is you can't build a loft in a badger hut, because they're only about 8 feet tall at the apex of the arch. However, the badger huts are proportional to human needs. 2 cots, a little stove, and a trunk can easily fit in a badger hut. All badger huts have a chimney. The vent hole in the back. And cooking was probably done on a stovetop or outside in a lean-to. A couple of the huts had 2 shallow niches in the back wall, and these niches were perfect to put your candlesticks in. I guess I don't have a slide of that one. Well, this project of searching for these badger huts has been a wonderful experience for us. The buildings speak of such integrity and fine craftsmanship. They're proud little structures, considering they are but unglorified hobbit holes. It's true, many of them were converted to root cellars or sheds in a later period, and a few badger huts appear to have been retrofitted in the early 20th century to be dairy coolers or root cellars, and the walls are cemented on the inside to tighten the buildings. Now that we think we know why they were built and we see the few remaining ones are in need of repair, what can be done? Can they be saved as on the National Register of Historic Places? Surely a couple could be saved. And you can see how well built they are. They're just so beautiful. The first step would be, of course, to ask the landowners if they'd be willing to fence off the huts, as much damage is being done, maybe not as much right now, but certainly 20 years ago, with cows standing on top of them and deer. And we've seen that. We'll go up to one and there's cows standing on them. So this can cause damage, of course. And perhaps 1 or 2 easy-to-access huts could be renovated and thereby preserved. Maybe our own students here at UW Platteville Engineering could rebuild some of the arches that are falling in. You can see these huts are beautifully made. Next one. And those are the niches I was talking about, would be perfect, So further research into tax and land records could reveal more about the early inhabitants of these properties where the huts sit. Using archaeological expertise to search for the material remnants at these sites could also better define their age and their purpose. But for now, these lovely little stone huts stand in cow pastures down by the creek, near the old mine tailings, beckoning us to come in, perhaps for a nice cup of tea. Huh? Thank you. One more. Slide. Yeah, thanks. There we go. Well, thank you. Yeah, of course. Does anybody have any comments, questions? Yeah. Stories.
There's a stretch of the state park in Dodgeville, and I think they said it was a mill house, but I don't know. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah. So at Governor Dodge State Park, yeah, that was a spring house, and there is a spring coming out of there. That was not a badger hut. The land's too low, I think, for that. Also, when you go into that, it goes down just a little bit, but the badger huts, also there's no mining right there that I was able to detect. And also I think they talk about it as being a spring house. So I think that is what it is. And it's adjacent to a farm. And you've seen the farm property that's right there. They're talking about the Dodgeville, they're talking about the spring house that looks like a badger hut at Governor Dodge State Park.
Oh, right.
Right, when you go to Stevens Falls. Yeah, we've been there many times. It's such a pretty place. Yeah.
How about the couple in Savannah State Park? When you go down into Savannah State Park, make a left-hand turn, which I think is the lower entrance. There's a spring there.
Yeah, it's a spring house, I think. I know what you're talking about. We just were there yesterday. It's at the south entrance. Yeah, you go to the south entrance and it's on your left.
Are there any other ones you've noticed in Savannah State Park?
I haven't. I'm sure I'm missing a bunch of them. They're on people's properties and I didn't see them from the road. If I see them from the road, I try to find the farmer, obviously, and talk about whether I can go in and see it. And mostly they've been very helpful and kind and letting me take pictures because these aren't going to be here in another 100 years or so. I mean, they're not. And I just wanted to document them. I think they're really interesting and important. And I don't think they're early resellers. I really don't. They're not. The documentation seems to be saying this is where people lived in the very earliest days. So I think there's a lot of credence for this. Yeah.
Are you familiar with the one on County B, west of town, past where Twin Flat School used to be? Down there's a road to the right,
and you look up and it's a double arched, and they're really, really big, and they're as big as the ones at Belmont State Park, which are also not badger huts.
Gone in that one or not?
I don't know what they are, and I haven't been there. I didn't ask the farmer to go in. They look badger huts. I mean, because you're gonna live there, you want a narrow opening. You don't want that big opening like that because it's gonna be cold. You can't cover it up with
rain.
Right, rain.
Is there any evidence of a wood front to it?
Some of them had doors that were put on. Some of them probably in the earliest days might have just had, cloth, something just to cover it. Two of them, the Leakley one and the Birkbeck Day one in Council Hill, that are exactly the same size and type. They have this really cool arched entryway that's pretty narrow, and then you go into the larger room. So it's really cool, that it has sort of an entryway, which I didn't find in any of the other ones. But I know what one you're talking about. It's at, can't come up, Harrison Road? No, the one you were talking about, where they have two of them. They remind me of the ones at Belmont. It's a single one, that maybe I haven't seen it, so maybe you want to tell me about it afterwards and I can
It's
go
right at the intersection. County B's going to go straight on, and the road is to the right. It used to have a big barn. Right now it's just got a barn foundation.
Okay.
And it sits in that. Dr. Holden from the hospital owns that property, and he sent it to me that I could go take pictures of it. So
Well, that'd be
People
great.
are very receptive
Let's go together.
to.
You can take the pictures and we'll
Yeah.
measure. We bring our tape measure with us, and we measure the inside, the outside. You know, we take a lot of photos. I try to show you the best of the photos. Yeah.
You talked about British Hollow being the capital, the Keene property.
Yeah.
You've seen, I mean, obviously it's right on 61. You see that. Is that a wood cellar?
So I haven't been in that one, and man, it looks like it's old enough to be a badger hut. And why would it be there? The house is so far away from it. It doesn't make any sense for that to be the root cellar on that property.
You been in that one or no?
No, I've never asked the owner if I can see that. That's on 61 when you're going toward,
Lancaster on the right side.
yeah, or Buena Vista.
Yeah, before it was.
Yeah, it's right in
Sits
between
above
the
that.
two. Yeah. I haven't been in it, but wouldn't that be fun? I'd love to get in that one. Yeah.
This may not be part of your research, but help me understand smelting. You said that they put them on hills, and do they drop the lead down a trough? Where's the fire?
Yeah, so Native Americans were building sort of wood-fired furnaces up against hillocks, you know, by carving out maybe 3 feet in, you know, against a hill. And then they make a big fire below, and they put the ore that they've taken out of the ground and maybe washed to get as much of the detritus off. And then they stack more wood on top of that. They don't get a very refined lead. They may get, you know, 50% purity, 60% maybe. Our later furnaces, like the one at British Hollow that I showed some pictures of, that unfortunately has been modernized and not, you know, it's just frustrating because it was almost on the National Register of Historic Places. I mean, people were writing the page for that, you know, that you send into the federal government and the state of Wisconsin, and they got in there before that. And now, according to the past state archaeologist, John Brand, it's not even eligible anymore because it's so not correct anymore. But anyway, that one was called a blast furnace or a Scotch hearth furnace. And the way that worked was you had a water wheel of some kind, you had power, and then you had big bellows in a workroom. And there's a tweer, which is like the nozzle of the bellow, and it's pointing to a firebox. And the firebox has wood at first, later coal, but wood or wood charcoal, making a very hot fire because of the bellows, which can bring it to the 1200 degrees that you need to actually drive off the sulfur molecules that you want to drive off to purify the lead ore. And then you can get to 80, 90%. And then you can re-smelt the stuff that's left over, the slag, in the next furnace, which is right next to it, because there's usually two, and that's called the slag furnace. And you get another 5 or 10% up. And then it's just, you know, little bits of black bits, and they used it in the mortar. They used it in the limestone mortar. Yeah.
So how do people, if it's putting on sulfur,
Yeah.
how did they deal with that, breathing that stuff?
So there's a number of examples. It's horrible. No, really, it was horrible. I'm sure the whole place stunk, and it probably was awful looking. The trees were gone. You know, smelting's a really dirty, not nice thing. I mean, it's very industrial. In fact, I'm giving a paper in a couple weeks, and it's going to be called Galena, Illinois, the Southern entrepot of the first industrial, you know, the first industry of Illinois, because it's an Illinois state conference I'm going to. So it's like, this is like the first major Northern Illinois industry that's a big industrial project. So there's a couple of them. One of them at Bennett's Bridge between New Diggins and Lead Mine. There's a bridge off of Ollie Bell Road. Anyway, the reason I know that is because another one of my Meekley relatives had a smelter there. And so I wanted to see the property. So Jeff and I walked through Well, it was not marijuana, but it had a lot of resinous. It was hemp, and it was up about this tall, so I could hardly see my way through. But the farmer, maybe you know those folks. They're really nice. Kevin Bennett, and anyway, we could see the foot, the foundational stones of the smelter. And Kevin said, yeah, no, when I was a kid, I remember the chimney was made of brick or something, and it went right up the hillside. They dug out, and so right up along as the hill goes up, 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 and then and then I found this cool thing in the newspaper that said the Leakley mine at this bridge is going to be the smelter's going to stop working. We're not going to use it anymore. The Leakley family's done with it. And it'll be an odd sight where no longer do we find this whiff of smoke coming out of the ground, even though the smelter's way below at the river level, at the Fever Galena River level. So all the way up is this chimney. Now, the smelter that we were talking about at British Hollow, that also, and unfortunately now it's made of cinder blocks, but it was made of bricks. And that also had a chimney all the way behind it, like the two furnaces were encased in stone, and their two chimneys went up and then met, and then went all the way up the hill, and then at the very top of the hill there was actually a smokestack. So you're trying everything you can to get those sulfur molecules, that whole smoke thing, away from your kids and your animals. And what's happening when sulfur hits moisture? Acid rain. Acid rain. So this area, like I say, I bet it wasn't very pretty in the 1840s with all these smelters going. It's probably pretty devastating and stinky. Yeah. Anything else?
Thanks, Tracy.
Well, thank you very much for being here. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Tracy. Thank you all for coming. And I think this research is really important because one thing that I've noticed is that we talk about miners as if that's all they are, right? They are their career. They are miners. And I think knowing that they had these houses and being able to imagine them in these houses and living outside of the mine adds a whole nother story, or a whole other piece to their story. So thank you for bringing these miners' lives back to life so that we can remember them and think of them as people like us here today. So thank you for that, and thank you all for showing up. And hopefully we'll get another lineup for next year, and we'll do this again next year.
Thank you.